You have to model, and it's weird because the new Peter Pan and Wendy, they try, with the messaging at boys here, but I still thought it nice try, but
here's the thing.
yeah.
I saw the trailer for that movie, and it's like, I don't care that Tinkerbell is black. They did make one of the Lost Boys a girl, and I'm like, okay,
You know,
but it's
you
like
get it works in the context of the story they're telling.
see, I get that, but
yeah,
admittedly, when I first saw the trailer, and I'm like, they're focusing on Wendy, which
it is. It's very much Wendy coming to terms with having to grow up.
I get that, and it's not that it's a bad idea, but I'm just so used to. I cannot tell you how much I loathe the Force is female. I
Okay, I'm not super aware of that,
so
but
it's something
yeah.
it's something Kathleen Kennedy said, and then
Oh, that's right. I
yeah,
ignore pretty much everything she says. So
I don't blame you. But so I was at Disneyland a couple weeks
yeah.
ago. I finally found a reason to drop that. I was at Disneyland, and I come out of Star Tours, and I'm going into one of the little shops in Tomorrowland, and I walked almost right into something that said the Force is female, and I'm like,
That's branding.
it's branding, but like I hate it, and I hate what it
Well,
represents.
we don't have that in Final Fantasy anymore, so I'll take it. Yeah, I'm kind of bummed about the way they're changing the story of Final Fantasy VII that way, but because that's a very ancient concept that
Mhm.
the sort of the rhythms of the earth are feminine, and the feminine has a destructive, angry side as well as a nurturing, caring side.
Like I like that philosophy. It's
Mhm.
just I'm so tired of seeing stories where it's like when I was growing up and when I was younger and I was read to this day obviously reading comics and watching Star Wars, I understood this is a this is a male this is a franchise, this is a product that is directed at men.
Right.
So I
That's
I come
interesting
here
that you came into it that way, because that's with Princess Leia being so high profile. That wasn't my take on Star Wars in the 80s.
well, it's interesting because I remember reading a magazine for preteen girls in the early 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
and they made a big deal of, oh, there's finally a girl in Star Wars
Oh, I
with Padme.
know.
And someone wrote in a month or two later and said, hey, what about Princess Leia? And they were like, well, yeah, Princess Leia was there, but Padme is closer to our reader's age, so we wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, what? But it's like
What is that now? That things have to be affirmational instead of aspirational.
it, that was my big thing with Netflix. She-Ra is it's like
Well, yeah.
why is she so young? Why does she have to be so young? Why can't
Okay,
she be an adult?
there was an example of a show that the characters did not behave authentically, and like that moment where we're like, wait, what is
This is a
Bill
trans
Stevens?
man.
Yeah, I was like, there's no authentic female voice in this show. It's what little boys think little girls do.
And
And yeah.
I think that's part of the issue with Steven Universe as well, is that's a story that's written by a woman who has a very particular idea of how little boys should behave.
Yeah.
And it's this very hippie pacifist thing while at the same time trying to write an action adventure show. And that's why Stephen doesn't really feel like a little boy. It does feel like a boy who has been very feminized because the
and
one male influence in
and if
his
that
life
yeah if that's
is
done deliberately, the
yeah.
way Frodo Baggins is a deliberately passive
Uh-huh.
character in Lord of the Rings, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
right? I think that there should be, like, one of the things I liked about Satine in Clone Wars is it showed another side to Obi-Wan,
Mm-hmm.
which was desperately needed. I like that they showed he had a bit of a life.
And
I'm tired of Star Wars fucking up what an attachment means.
and it borrowed a bit from the Jedi Apprentice books, because in those books there was a point where Obi-Wan actually left the order to join a teen rebellion.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah. And
that actually.
he has a life. These characters have lives. If you're going to
Mm-hmm.
make these characters this old, even if, oh, you don't age physically, it's a lot of living that they've
Mm-hmm.
done because they're in war. And if you ever talk to someone who's seen prolonged fighting, somebody like
Mm-hmm.
Akila, who we've had on, she wants to come
Yeah.
back, by the way. She's game. She had a great time. But
Nice.
war affects you. War makes you less likely to advocate for violent solutions because you've seen so much death. She talks a lot about how she's constantly making sure she doesn't go too far because she knows what she's capable of, because she was, and in some ways always will be, a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
That's a woman who has seen war.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see any of that in
No.
Bo-Katan? No. And that's not girl power. When you are setting up unrealistic standards, saying this is you, ladies, this is you in media, they've got to be something that isn't setting girls up for failure. And trust me, all that messaging where you can do anything a boy can do, just be yourself, girls can be anything, the world crushes that out of you.
And it's like, as we were preparing to do this, I think we both put together lists of like genuine female characters
Yeah.
or authentic feminine
Yeah.
characters. And like my list is like Cinderella from 2015 Cinderella, because that, that's a movie where she faces adversity, but she does rely on inner strength.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a bit of long suffering, because that is also a feminine trait, is
And
long suffering. But
it's Cinderella. You can only change it so much before she's no longer Cinderella. So the fact that they kept Cinderella in Cinderella is great.
it's like, I've seen people complain, well, why didn't she leave her abusive situation? Why didn't she do this or that? I don't know.
What? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Did they not understand the point of the story?
No.
Oh my God.
But it's the people I saw doing that. That was especially during the Tumblr days, where they were like, well, why didn't she stand up for herself? Why didn't she do this? And
you're shitting me.
No. And it's like, well, one, the world they're in doesn't allow her to just walk away. Two, there is a strength in endurance, and that's what the story is supposed to be showing. But
it wasn't an option back then.
No. But the one thing is, there's a moment where, and this was a moment that I saw in the trailers, and I'm like, oh, that sounds dumb. But when I actually saw it in context, where she says, I will protect the kingdom from you, talking to her stepmother. And it's like the choice she makes, sacrificing herself to avoid something worse happening. I'm like, yes.
Well, that's Queen Esther.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also like that moment in Tangled where Rapunzel tells Gothel, let me heal him and I'll go with you.
Right.
And it's like, now you can make the argument that we shouldn't be teaching girls to sacrifice themselves for men, or to
why we teach boys to sacrifice themselves that way. I mean,
well, true, but it's like
one,
it is a long standing thing where women have been taught we're supposed to give ourselves for everyone else.
But Song, don't you know it's harder to be a man than a woman, and men are disposable and women are the only ones society cares about? I've seen a ton of forums that tell me that the world doesn't care about men. Okay, I'll drop the sarcasm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember a couple weeks ago I sent you a song that was trending on TikTok?
Yeah. And I was very confused.
So the song is Labor by Paloma Paris. And it is all about how women suffer for men. And it's, you make me do too much labor, maid, nurse, mother. It's not an act of love if you make her, because yeah, marital rape is really something to bring into your female anthem. But there is this there's this comment where she says, also, he never lifts a finger. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just talk about arranged marriage for a minute. So we talk about, oh, arranged marriage was terrible for women because, you know, the men in her life would sell her off. And yes, this is a bad thing. But here's the thing. Men weren't always the one choosing which woman they're just going to buy from her father. Mm-hmm. Usually that was a decision that was made by their father.
That's right.
Telling them who they were going to marry. So this...
It's both
yes
people in it. Yeah.
And the idea that men don't have to do anything, because I'm sorry, even back in the 50s when, oh, it was so bad, women weren't allowed to go out and work, they had to stay and clean the house and raise the children, and also a lot of them would get to go to the beauty parlor and go hang out with friends, and mm-hmm. It wasn't always that bad. Well, the man is out working. And it's like, and another thing, another sound bit that's been trending in reels and stuff is, it's so unfair that there's never been a time where women got to wear beautiful floor-length dresses and had the right to vote. I'm sorry, about the time women were wearing floor-length dresses, most men didn't have the right to vote.
Yeah.
It's this oppression porn of women have been so tormented and taken advantage of, and we all have been.
That was one thing that confused the shit out of me with WandaVision, is why is a woman who was born in Eastern Europe fantasizing about early Cold War America? I know they tried to explain it, but it never quite landed for me. It was just, why is this her fantasy? It, you know, at some point it's like, well, this is just the format, go with it. But again, a character doesn't have to be authentic as long as there's a consistency to the whole thing, and as long as that show was high camp and they were reenacting TV shows, I was okay with it. The minute it tried to make a point, I was like, nope, Team Agatha all the way. Wanda does not deserve her power. She's dangerous.
Saw that coming because I watched I watched the first two, because they debuted 2 episodes the first night, and I watched it, and it's like 50s, 60s, and then I'm counting, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna get a decade each episode, and then we're gonna hit the modern times, and then it's gonna break formula, and I'm like, hey.
Well, I mean, what a horrible. There's another show where they're like, oh, it's so feminist, but it showed her being happy in the 50s and 60s and becoming more and more miserable as we got closer to present day. What the hell, Disney?
And it's like, you know, I get that, because there are aspects of 50s society besides just the fashion that I do like. You know, I would love to be the stay-at-home wife who just like take care of the house and then go out and get dressed up and host cocktail parties and visit with friends. You know, that sounds pretty good to me.
But you're prepared to accept the trade-offs. And again, I'd love to see an authentic portrayal of the 1950s as opposed to the stuff they do, because these shows always take a side on an era instead of just kind of showing the good and the bad. You
Uh-huh.
know, I mean, even Madman, as it went along, definitely picked a side on that whole thing. They
Yeah.
did the high wire act a little better, but by the end, it was very clear you were supposed to think, you know, Don Draper was just a horrible piece of shit, not just a man of his time.
Uh-huh.
And
And it's like with Howard and Lovecraft and even Tolkien in a way, where it's like I'm not going to judge them for certain
blind spots. Yeah.
and blind spots.
Yeah.
And you know, people call Lovecraft a Nazi because he agreed with Hitler on a few
A
points.
lot of people in the UK did because Hitler was going to protect them from the Russians.
There is also the thing that even people in Germany didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, I mean,
And
in the UK,
I,
we see how fucked up the UK is right now, right? I mean, but
yeah, and so it's like even there were some people who knew, who heard whisperings of what was
yeah,
happening. Lovecraft probably did not.
there's
Now,
there's a lot we can critique Lovecraft on without going there, right?
yes,
I mean, the way he used magic to sneak in things like promiscuous gay sex. Okay, dude. I'll give you
yeah.
points for cleverness there. Well done, but don't piss in my ear and tell me it's raining.
No, here's I think Lovecraft was gay for Howard.
Oh,
I
I think he was gay for a few. Well, not totally
but,
gay. Like
well,
that's
yeah,
the thing.
but no, I think I'm that's kind of my theory. I think he was very, very fond of Howard.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, there's a, you know, that's why I was so this. I will get to an authentic female character making Loki bisexual in the MCU. Just all of his behavior, you backfill that. That actually makes sense. You've
Uh-huh.
got Odin for a dad. You're into, you know, sons of Odin as well as daughters of Odin. There's no way you can win. Of course, you're going to act out. That's totally consistent with, you know, you also go for emotionally unavailable women who will never love you. Enter Sylvie. And
Yeah.
there's an example of a character where that character makes no sense based on how she's portrayed and how she responds to things and how she's written on the page. And people kept saying to me when I'm like, oh my God, Sylvie fucking sucks. They're like, I think she's cute. And I said, that's exactly the problem. She's been on the run for they make her older than him on the
Uh-huh.
show, and they keep fucking with the Asgardians' age. But you know, you're talking about a person who's about 1,000 years old, has been jumping from apocalypse to apocalypse for that long since she was 8 years old. She wouldn't be cute. She'd
No.
be terrifying. And I mean, the way they give her the power to fuck with people's minds and like, no, this is terrible. And if I felt like the show was intending her to be terrible, all right, but she she toys with the affection of an already traumatized guy. And that's supposed to be redemption for him because he loves her. That's not love. That's a fucking trauma bond. And again, that's dark, Disney. If I thought for a second you intended to go there, I'd be doing a standing ovation, edge lord top keck. But I don't think it's intentional. I mean, if you ever see the show Killjoys, Hannah John Kamen's character, Dutch, is essentially set up the same way, but Dutch is played she has this feral quality to her
Mm-hmm.
performance that is so good and makes so much sense. And she is scary and she makes choices that are very challenging at times. And yes, if you give the character the backstory that she's given, she's going to do that.
And
And
that's one thing that's, there's a saying that like writers need to be a little bit of everything. You have to be a psychologist, you have to be in
mhm.
some cases a bit of a weapons expert. You have to understand a lot of different things in order to write well. And
Well,
psychology is a big one.
you have to write what you're writing. And there are some people like, yeah, sorry, you have to understand what you're writing. Write what you know, they say.
Yeah.
And, the late George Perez, he wrote great female characters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, his Wonder Woman. And yes, he was the artist. He worked with people like Marv Wolfman. It wasn't just him.
Mm-hmm.
But he always based his female characters based on women he knew. And he admitted that was something of a cheat, but we all have them. When I need to understand what women see in Thor, I ask you because I don't fucking know. And it's really important to know what you don't know. And and this is something like, how do you feel about this? To me, authenticity comes down to a writer going, this was right for this woman. And characters become inauthentic when the writer is trying to say, this is what all women should be.
And like, here's the thing, because as I was making this list, I realized most of the women I was thinking about were like written by men. Because even Cinderella, it's a man who wrote the script. It's the same guy who wrote the script for Rogue One.
But Terry
And
Pratchett wrote great women.
yeah, and going to Rogue One, I would even consider Jin, the main character there. I would consider her authentically feminine because everything she does makes
Yeah,
sense to
she was
me.
all right. She was all
I
right.
can,
Yeah,
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 I can see how a woman would make those decisions.
yeah.
And one of the best modern examples I can think of for feminine characters is Hayao Miyazaki movies. And I
Yeah,
mean,
he just makes Alice in Wonderland over and over and over again, though.
well, true, but people have even asked him, "Oh, how do you write such great female characters?" And he's like,
Yeah,
"I don't. I
yeah.
just write characters."
And that's
And
the core of it, isn't it?
yeah, well, I mean, like even Chihiro is based off his friend's daughter
Mm-hmm.
because he saw this little girl and he's like, so he built a story around that. And you
Yeah.
see My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service and even Howl's Moving Castle. Sophie absolutely feels like an authentic feminine character
You
to
want to
me.
you want to hear a show, and this is going to be very weird, that has some of the best, very different, very difficult, campy at times characters, but they all feel very authentic, is The Good Doctor. That's the weirdest show to praise that way. But they had a scene a few weeks ago where there's a gay couple, and one of the
Mhm.
characters isn't just gay, he's formerly Orthodox Jewish.
Ah,
And so when anything comes around to religious belief, he just gets triggered and doesn't handle it well. And there was one scene where he was completely railroading his boyfriend in a fight. And it wasn't screaming and yelling, it wasn't over the top. And but it was absolutely, I was actually holding my breath. It was so believable. And that's one of the things that really stings when people say, you interrupt too much, you do this, you do that. Please see the culture I come from and understand that it is really hard to timing switch sometimes. And I looked up the stuff about that episode, and the showrunner said he based that story on members of his own family. And it's like,
mhm.
yeah, that's why it felt so real. You know?
Yeah,
Yeah. It was
it's
good. It was really well done. But I mean, they had Howard Shore loves the cutthroat bitch character. You may
mhm,
recognize that from House.
mhm.
And they tried to do that again with a character named Morgan. She was terrible. at first. They start characters and they're terrible, and then they work with them and then they become good. So they've got her, who has now realized, no, people skills actually are important. You know, you don't have to hate your femininity so much that you ignore bedside manner. But then they've got another character. She's a Black lady, and she comes from a very religious family. And they originally brought her in, and it was the cliche, oh, she doesn't support a character having an abortion, right? But now it informs her in really nuanced ways at times. They did an episode where she was really uncomfortable being a role model for Black girls, because she's like, I don't know how to what to tell them to do. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to be this. And they leaned into the pressure of being a strong Black woman without it feeling maudlin. And I gave them a ton of credit for that, because it was a light touch. They didn't lecture the audience. And I don't know about you, I'm really, really tired of being lectured about what women should be.
Oh God, and that's why something like Peter and Wendy bothered me, is just because I'm like, I don't mind a story based around women, obviously, but I'm just tired of stories being turned into that.
It's better than the trailers make it.
And like, I am going to see it, and I'm sure it'll be fine. It's just what the trend represents.
Okay, I'll set you up for this, everyone. Yes, it ends up being a team effort in the end. It is trying to be one of those Wonderful World of Disney Sunday afternoon movies that used to be on TV.
I miss those.
Yeah, that's where it comes in. And they did try to be very, how do you do, fellow kids? The boy that plays Peter Pan is really good. It is definitely more of a team effort. And how do I say this? It is very, I mean, the book is centers on Wendy and not wanting to grow up, yada, yada, right? So they go back to the book in that way. They're actually even pulling specific lines out of the book at times. And that was in the book, that was J.M. Barrie's original intent. That is what Peter Pan was about back then. Now they gloss over certain things.
Like Peter being an absolute little psychopath?
No, they don't. They soften it, but the big twist focuses on that kind of.
Interesting.
And yeah, and to me, it was more, they win because they're a team, not Wendy's the hero. She definitely is. I mean, because fairy magic solves a lot of problems.
Of course.
In it. But no, there are some really good sword fights between Peter Pan and Captain Hook. And nice. Tiger Lily, oh my God, did they thread the needle on that character? Holy shit, she's possibly the most awesome character in the whole thing. But yeah, I went in with very low expectations, because I'm like, why is this only Disney Plus? Why, haven't we heard much about it? Jude Law as Captain Hook. We'll see. He's very much playing a children's theater villain. So you have to go into it again. This is for kids.
And here's the thing: Jude Law voiced Pitch Black in Rise of the Guardians.
Yeah.
So like, his voice is synonymous with terror for me.
he plays the not quite menacing kids show baddie quite well. And it's a deconstruction of what the books did with Captain Hook that the Disney film didn't. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But Mila Jovovich's daughter is Wendy. And she's quite good. What I like about her is even though they're doing the girl power thing, she actually seems terrified through most of it.
That's a nice change.
Exactly. Like she's doing it because she wants to protect her brothers, but she's scared. And that was refreshing. And so that I'll give you that because that one was hard because it is Victorian England.
Yeah.
Right. You're not going to and threading the needle with a story for kids today that takes place in the past, when a girl was coming of age at 16, that's a hard sell.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when we're dealing with these old stories, we have to, and that's why I say authentic doesn't mean realistic. I compare what they did with that to that horrendous show, the Nevers, Night and Day. I mean, that was a horrible show. That just felt fetishy from start. I mean, when a character, did you watch that song?
I saw bits of it.
Oh my God. Did you see the scene where she's chasing somebody and she jumps down and her dress gets caught on a staircase and it gets torn off, and so she lands and she's in her corset and pantaloons, and I was like, that's not possible. She's corseted, it would tear at the waist before that bodice came off. Right, this is Joss Whedon. Holy fuck.
I was watching Alex Borstein did a comedy special recently on Amazon. Oh my God. I don't think I laughed at all. It was so much just making a statement, but it's like she went off on corsets and how awful they are while she's wearing a waist cincher, and I'm just like, can I smack you with my corset? Can we sit down and have tea? I want to talk to you about my experience.
That's like the whole fight over shapewear. Yeah. Right. And some people say, why should we have to do this? It's so you can be a healthy body weight, wear proper supportive garments, and still have that smooth line in modern clothes because no one wants to pay for lining anymore.
Yeah. It's not even about making you look thinner. It's just, as James Gunn said, it will make you look better in your clothes. And why wouldn't you want that? Not James Gunn, Tim Gunn.
Right. I was going to say, James Gunn knows about shapewear. Tell me more. He suddenly became very interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, I have shapewear. The strangest thing for me is the whole going pee in shapewear. And people have asked us, please explain anything fashion. Yes. So this is shapewear, guys, is sort of a modern day girdle / slip. Clothes are made pretty thin now. Nobody pays to have properly lined clothes anymore.
Also, I just wanted to say, women complain, oh no, why don't they give us pockets? Well, because the fabric they're using in most modern clothes can't handle pockets.
Yeah, well, it's stretch and it'll tear. But also they don't make them well enough so that pockets won't look awful. I end up cutting out pockets and sewing them closed because they tent and it looks terrible. But so shapewear is this stuff. It's stretchy stuff that it smooths everything out. So, it takes the place of underwear. It seams the bra line in the back, because if your bra's fitted properly, it does leave an indentation. It's supposed to lift from the band, not be on your shoulders. And so it just sort of smooths everything out. But obviously, if you need to go to the bathroom, either you take everything off, or Shapewear has this little slit in the middle. So it's like crotchless panties. And the idea is that you're supposed to go pee with the garment still on. And everything in my brain always tells me this is wrong.
And like, you know, whenever you see pictures of corsets nowadays, the women are always wearing the panties under the corset.
That doesn't
Oh
work.
my God.
Oh
no.
my God.
The day I realized, oh no, if I wear them outside the corset, I can actually go to the bathroom.
That's right.
And that's when I started being able to actually wear my corset every day to work, because otherwise I just couldn't do it.
One thing I wish someone would actually start making, because this is really hard, is the chemises that go under corsets, so it cuts down on the rub. Because you buy these things and a lot of the underdresses have zippers. Well, you can't put that under a corset.
No,
because it presses into your skin.
Now, I tend to wear just like basic stretch camisoles that I get from like Walmart. So I have that protection.
Okay.
There's no zipper. The seams haven't given me much trouble.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I
mean, I actually have a few I had made for when I'm doing full period, because that's an issue.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, this conversation about shapewear, this is a very authentic girl world conversation, right? This is the stuff I wanted to see in She-Hulk. So
yeah,
we don't want to go too much longer. So do you have anything to add before we pivot to why She-Hulk is like a close but no cigar on authenticity for me?
So let's cover She-Hulk, and then I have a character I want to talk about that's actually very similar to close us out.
Awesome. Okay. Because I was, I was with She-Hulk right until the end. I mean, because the horrible stuff she went through was very real. Those types of men exist. Those sorts of workplace things exist. That is very real for a professional woman in a major US city, notably California. Now, if you don't know that experience, you might not relate to it the same way. And because it is so targeted, that's fine, right? But I found it really weird, because to me, it was like, well, Jen makes terrible choices. And so the men she meets and everything she goes through, her shitty friends, her online profile designed for quantity over quality, everything that happens to her is a consequence of her choices. Not that the world is terrible for women. That's not how I took it at all. And people kept telling me, well, that's not what the show is saying. I'm like, did you speak to the show? Is the robot at the end real and you got to ask him? Like, what do you mean?
And like, my thing with it is I felt it very much leaned into the whole hot mess trend that we've seen. And it acknowledges the issues, but I didn't feel like it actually addressed them.
Well, here's why. Okay. They bailed out of the revenge porn story.
Yeah.
And that pissed me off as someone who, I hate calling myself a victim of it, as somebody who's used my adult focused work against me, to say things. You get your tits out for a living. I'm a real journalist. Don't tell me how to do your job. Thanks, Milo Yiannopoulos. Stuff like that. People finding pictures that they think are proof I'm loose or a slut. Or, I did do some topless work, mostly for art books, things like that back in the day. And people throw it in my face. Like, how do we tell little girls you can do anything you want experiment, live your life, be a whole person, without telling them, but the world is going to hold it against you forever, because it will. I'm living proof. And part of the reason I did it, it was because I was a women's studies minor, but it was, okay, let's test this. Let's go, how can I talk about this stuff unless I do it? Right? Everything's experiential, narrative shit. Let's actually do it. I was inspired by Gloria Steinem working at the Playboy Club, right? Well, what I learned is, no, you can't have it all. If you decide to be a whole person, if you approach sex and relationships the way men do, you are branded a slut. And if you are branded a slut, you are also stupid. And people will challenge your authority and not listen to you and try to fuck you over and sabotage you every chance they possibly can, because they are offended by your existence. You're not a good girl. And so you're a bad girl, and bad girls get punished. And that is the world. It's not right. It is the world. And so they went to that revenge porn thing, right? And I was like, oh boy, people, and I guess this is an experience thing, right? Because people they hate the fans with the whole trolling on the internet and, all the stuff Jen goes through. And I was coming at this from the perspective of somebody who's been through that numerous times. And what I noticed is a lot of the screen names and things like that were clearly from women. And I pointed that out, and nobody would listen. It's like, no, that's not what they meant. How do you fucking know? And they send me an article. They talked about trolling the trolls. Well, that's trolls, guys. That's not the fan base. That's not the regular guy. The average fan is not a troll. Why are you equating it that way? But
I mean, there is the fact that fans and anyone who has been critical of choices that Marvel and other places have made, like when we saw the Captain Marvel backlash, it was all, oh, it's just trolls on the internet. So I understand why.
Okay,
I understand why they saw themselves in that, but at the same time, it is a bit telling.
If you decide to go, fuck you, you slutty bitch, well, you're a troll. That's not legitimate criticism. That's not, here's my issue with this depiction of the characters. Like, you're a fucking whore. That is trolling. Like, behavior matters, right?
And I don't think everyone who's been critical of it has been like that, but at the same time, I've seen people become that way,
right?
And so it's like, you can say, I'm not a troll, I don't appreciate being called a troll, but at the same time, many I'm just going to say it, many comic skaters and people who I am aware of from that time, they have become trolls. They have become everything they tried to deny that they were.
It's just this weird ritual at this point. It's like a self-soothe.
Yeah, but they won't step back.
Right.
And they won't see what they've become.
And that's what I found so interesting about that show, is because they were depicting things that really happened. Like, it had to be, people had to see themselves in that depiction to go, hey, that's me. That means they touched on something real, and it is a pain point in society. And that was the issue, is that so many people were sympathizing and empathizing with the faceless horde coming at Jen, that nobody was looking at it from Jen's point of view, and the amount of self-blame she was engaging in, because her choices did lead her there, even though nobody deserves what happened to her. And I was really wondering how they were gonna resolve the revenge porn storyline, because you're taking something that's considered a fate worse than death for women, You're a victim forever if it happens to you. There's no coming back from it. And I thought, oh, how interesting. You're taking this very like tough talk, hot mess heroine and putting her in this situation. I really want to see how they deal with this. And then they didn't. And as funny as I found the finale as it in terms of a deconstruction of all things Marvel Disney, I was ticked that they bailed out of that, because that is fate worse than death territory.
And that is why, is the ending comic book accurate? Is that the kind of thing Jen did in the comic? Oh, absolutely.
And also,
however, that's why it frustrated me, because I'm like, there's no resolution. But we don't even get to see how things are resolved.
And let's face it, they dodge the real life reactions, how Jen would be treated in the real world. I mean, it drove me crazy when they have her in bed with Tony Stark. And it's like, Tony, why are you considered fine and I'm a slut? It's like, girl, you know why.
Yeah.
Every woman knows why. Why are you asking a man? And why are you asking that man? That's men writing women, because they're trying to show how unfair it is. And it's like, yes, it is unfair, but you don't know what it's like to be on the receiving end of this. And the reason guys are so defensive of their nerd media is because it is how they learn to navigate the world. That's very real. And maybe it led them astray more and more when I watch this stuff, going, what message is this sending to young men? I start thinking, nothing necessarily good here. These are false expectations. It was okay back in Stan Lee's day where that stuff actually worked. I mean, he was telling his own experiences.
I remember an issue of Spider-Man not too long ago, probably just about 10, 12 years ago, where he got drunk at a wedding. I think it was actually Aunt May's wedding.
Okay.
And MJ showed up. And he couldn't handle it, so he got drunk and he ended up sleeping with his roommate, who was a woman. And a couple months later, there's a letter to the editor saying, why would you have him do that? That's not heroic. And the response was, well, we've always wanted to write the story we would see outside our windows, and that's something that happens. And that, to me, just, it's normalizing something that I consider to be very unhealthy and immature behavior. And it did not go well. Peter got yelled at. He missed when he was supposed to meet up with MJ afterwards. And I'm just like, why are we normalizing this? And it's like the hot mess with women, where it's one thing to acknowledge that women can't always have everything together, that we can't be perfect all the time. But the hot mess goes too far in the other direction.
Well, it makes it seem like this is, I think that Girls, Lena Dunham's show, was the one that really made it seem like there's nothing wrong with being a hot mess, that this is okay, instead of going, yeah, this happens, hot mess, gonna hot mess. And I didn't think, because Jen's not happy.
No.
Jen's a miserable person. It's the beginning of her story. And what I really thought they were going for is, Tony Stark starts as a womanizer. Stephen Strange starts off as an asshole. They get a comeuppance and humble. Thor has to humble. They were putting her on the same playing field as the male heroes, and found the hard way the world does not see it the same way. Even when the show was about a woman, they kept saying, whose show is this? the default audience kept going ours. And the fact it's the same thing I had with Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. As somebody who studied this stuff and created media based on what we know the realities of the world are regarding women, I was like, how did you guys not see this coming? This was absolutely predictable.
I'll be honest, I don't like her. I think she's a terrible person, and I do not want her in any position of power.
Well, because
that's just,
let's face it, that's what every media outlet in some way or another has told you to think since the 90s. Neither of us knows her as a person.
I mean, I'd like to think I did make my own decisions based on things I've learned about her.
Yeah, but you learned from where?
I mean, when I heard about pretty much her first big breakout case as a lawyer and hearing her laugh about it years later, because her first big case was she defended a man who raped a child into a coma. And years later, when she talked about it, she laughed. And I'm just like,
well, that could have been a nervous laugh, though.
Maybe, but the way she talked about it, I'm still like, you know what? I just don't like you. That doesn't sit well with me.
See, I kind of understand laughing at the horror, which is what She-Hulk tried to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not saying it's right to laugh at it. I'm just saying that sometimes as a self-defense mechanism, you do. I mean, if I think about the utter horror of what the woman stalking me is doing right now, impersonating a trans woman to act like a stereotype of a trans woman stalking a cis woman, right? Mm-hmm. It's too angering. And so I've nicknamed her Stalker Chan, and I'm making light of it. I'm going full Majima from Yakuza and just jokering the hell out of it. So it's possible that's what she was doing. You know, my point is we don't know. We don't know the truth. We don't know her personally. We just know what the media has said about her. And they're doing the exact same thing to Chrystia Freeland up here. And, you know, we think that about Hillary Clinton because we're supposed to think that way about Hillary Clinton. And her team, for whatever reason, was like, this is fine. We're just going to move on. And instead of recognizing, same problem with Kamala Harris, you need to actively deal with that because of the biases we know exist with women who seek positions of power.
Yeah.
There's a reason Marjorie Taylor Greene is in some ways more accepted than Hillary Clinton. She's easy to peg. We know exactly what we're supposed to think about her. So, you know, people hate her, but I mean, she ran unopposed, but the conservatives were like, nope, she's one of us. So it's fine. And let's face it, any woman who wants that job and doesn't want to stay home is a crazy bitch anyway. So she's exactly what we expect. And again, I'm not saying that's right. It's dead wrong, but she's being rewarded for playing the stereotypes.
Yeah. And I mean, we see that even in writing nowadays, where it's like everyone wants a familiar trope. Everyone wants it. Yeah. Everyone wants something that makes sense.
Well, and it's the Disney thing of you have to do Disney does pre-existing format. So you can set things up really quickly and blow through a story in 2.5 hours or 6 episodes. If they get 10, it's sort of a miracle.
Which I, as a writer, do not like, but
I don't like it either. And I think it's funny that the usual suspects who are all tropes versus women aren't screaming, but it's because it's the tropes they like, as opposed to the tropes they don't like. And so now they're the everything's fine dog.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that, go ahead, sorry.
So, well, no, finish your thought.
Well, that was the big disappointment for me with She-Hulk is it's a show that goes there. But they didn't go there with how to move forward from that, you know, because that is a pretty horrifying thing for women to contemplate.
Yeah.
And the reality is, as somebody who's been through it, how do you go on? You just do. Some days you hate yourself. Some days you're angry at the world. Some days you just can't. Some days you do more stupid shit because what's the point? You're ruined. So there's no point in trying anymore. Nobody's going to see you as anything but a sullied toy.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of showing that, they just bailed on a whole thing with a fourth wall break.
Yeah.
And it's almost admitting that, yeah, there is
You
no
didn't know what to do.
Well, there isn't anything. It's an inherently unsatisfying ending. And so they did the Rick and Morty thing of just bailing out of it.
Yeah. And to me, again, as a writer, for me, that's something I'm like, that's what I do when I've written myself into a corner and I don't know what to do.
That's exactly what they did. That's exactly what it was.
And that's the thing, is it's like you can lampshade it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's unsatisfying because you didn't know what you were doing and you didn't find a satisfying resolution, which is the whole point of storytelling.
Well, and let's face it, in that moment, you don't feel angry. First and foremost, you feel despair.
I mean,
so they should have found some other way. Jen should have gotten angry at the indignities of everything. You know, it would have been if they had hacked it and posted pictures of her in her PJs on a Saturday night, I would have understood the anger. But revenge porn is a violation. You don't just get angry. It's way, way deeper than that. And that's, it was an inauthentic moment. And maybe there was somebody there who's been through it and they just haven't worked through it. That's very possible. There's a lot of that out there. But it just, that moment, as much as I thought, like I said, I thought the ending was hilarious. And I did give the show a lot of, all right, it's Rick and Morty. It's Rick and Morty. This is what we expect from Rick and Morty. I can't say it's okay on Rick and Morty and not say it's okay here. But that was a very inauthentic in terms of girl world moment in a show that otherwise like nailed some really tender stuff. And I think that was part of what I found fascinating about the show, because the show itself was something of a hot mess as well, right? Like the pacing was a mess. It was so breakneck. Nothing had a chance to breathe. It was like they were so self-conscious about the high wire act they were engaged in that they just didn't allow any moment to sit.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's a perfect show. I liked it in part because of how messy it was, because they were figuring out how to tell that story. And it was, it was heavily influenced by the show Fleabag.
At the same time, I think it needed some more time in the oven.
All those shows do, though. That's my feeling about every single one of those Disney Plus Marvel shows.
Except Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel was good.
And it was the worst performing one of all of them.